Never pretend you do not know what that ancient silver bell means when its sharp metallic tone rings after 25 whole years of silent isolation, whispered the mysterious courier Samuel Reed as Claire Bennett carefully placed a steaming porcelain cup of rich dark coffee right beside the Alpha King's broad right hand upon the heavy polished oak dining table inside the Golden Palace Hall. Claire froze for a tiny fraction of a second, her soft gray-blue eyes widening in sudden cold horror before she expertly smoothed her dark rustic linen apron and continued serving the surrounding noble court as if absolutely nothing out of the ordinary had occurred. Across the grand sunlit hall, King Alexander Hayes noticed her momentary hesitation, watching the 25-year-old fair-skinned waitress with intense calculating eyes as she retreated toward the arched stone service passageway. The 35-year-old Alpha King possessed a commanding regal presence with a sharp chiseled jawline, short neatly groomed dark hair and piercing amber eyes that could cut through any subtle lie or deceptive maneuver, yet Claire had spent an entire peaceful year moving like a quiet phantom through his crowded castle, never attracting unnecessary attention until this fateful morning. As Samuel Reed melted into the shadowed marble corridor, Alexander stood up abruptly, his heavy dark fur cloak sweeping behind his broad shoulders as he called her name across the silent chamber. Claire turned around slowly, keeping her chin tucked down and her slender hands neatly folded over her apron, intentionally concealing the tiny silver crescent pendant that hung hidden beneath her high collar. Alexander closed the distance between them with slow, deliberate strides, his heavy leather boots thudding against the flagstone floor while his faint golden alpha aura hovered around him like a protective mantle. He leaned down slightly, looking straight into her calm, fair face, and asked if someone had spoken to her about the abandoned Eastern Tower bell. Claire swallowed hard, maintaining her carefully practiced composure while inwardly her heart slammed wildly against her ribs like a trapped bird seeking escape. She softly answered that a courier had simply asked for an extra pitcher of sweet cream, but Alexander knew instantly that his royal waitress was holding back the truth. He reached out, stopping just an inch short of touching her trembling shoulder as he warned her in a low, stern voice that the Eastern Bell was tied directly to an ancient bloodline summoning ritual created solely for the lost rulers of House Bennett who had vanished during the violent political purge 25 years ago. Before Claire could construct another clever shield of words, a deep, deafening chime suddenly erupted from the high mountain tower, shaking the heavy iron chandeliers and causing every single noble warrior, guard and servant in the palace to instantly drop their golden goblets in absolute paralysis. The resonant metallic vibration thundered through the stone foundations, vibrating through Claire's very bones as the forgotten bell sounded for the first time in a quarter century. Alexander spun around, staring at the distant eastern spire in utter disbelief before turning his piercing amber gaze back onto Claire's pale face, where unmistakable dread was written plain as day. She stared at the archway as if expecting a horde of armed shadows to burst through at any moment. Alexander stepped closer, his voice dropping to a harsh, urgent whisper, asking how a humble servant girl possessed intimate knowledge of a sacred bell that had been silenced long before her birth. Claire took a deep, steadying breath, knowing in her soul that hiding her heritage any longer would only invite swift destruction. She looked directly into the Alpha King's eyes, dropping all pretense of meek servitude and revealing the fierce, radiant nobility resting dormant within her spirit. She quietly confessed that her mother, Elena Bennett, had repeatedly drilled a single sacred rule into her mind during her lonely childhood in hiding. She explained that if the ancient Eastern Bell ever rang across the valley, it meant the corrupt High Council hunters had finally tracked down the last surviving heir of the royal Bennett bloodline, and that the time for running was officially over. Every single wolf inside the vast royal hall stood completely petrified as the deep metallic vibrations of the ancient Eastern Bell echoed endlessly through the stone corridors, shaking the dust from the high vaulted ceilings. King Alexander Hayes kept his sharp amber gaze locked onto Claire Bennett, watching as the pale, fair-skinned waitress clutched the hidden silver pendant beneath her linen collar while her body trembled with profound terror. The surrounding court nobles began to whisper in rising panic, drawing their silver daggers and looking around nervously as if the legendary specters of the past were about to breach the heavy iron gates. Alexander did not wait for the chaos to escalate. He reached out, taking Claire's slender arm with surprising gentleness, and guided her swiftly away from the whispering crowd, leading her through a private side entrance into the high archives of the royal castle. The archives were a quiet sanctuary filled with massive oak bookshelves, ancient leather-bound scrolls, and towering glass windows that overlooked the misty northern mountains. Alexander closed the heavy double doors behind them and turned to face the young woman who had served his coffee in silence for an entire year. He stood a respectful distance away, allowing his warm golden alpha aura to soothe the freezing fear that enveloped her. He told her softly that she did not need to cringe in terror inside his presence because no harm would come to her within these walls as long as he drew breath. Claire looked up at the 35-year-old Alpha King, her gray-blue eyes searching his handsome face for any sign of betrayal or hidden cruelty. She saw only genuine concern and an unwavering resolve that made her heart ache with unexpected trust. She reached up with trembling fingers and slowly pulled the silver chain from beneath her high collar, revealing the polished crescent pendant surrounding a tiny glowing star. Alexander took a sharp breath as his eyes instantly recognized the sacred royal crest of House Bennett, a powerful bloodline that history books claimed had been entirely wiped out during the bloody political purge 25 years ago. He stepped closer, asking her in a low, reverent voice what her mother had told her about this ancient artifact. Claire explained that her mother Elena Bennett and her father Thomas Bennett had raised her in complete isolation deep within the dense wilderness, constantly shifting locations to evade the High Council search parties. Her mother had given her the pendant on her 18th birthday, instructing her to hide her royal identity at all costs and to live as an ordinary human servant until the day the Eastern bell chimed. Alexander listened intently, his mind piecing together the dark historical secrets that his corrupt elders had buried long ago. He informed Claire that the Eastern bell was not merely a warning signal but an ancient magical beacon designed to react only when a true royal heir reached full maturity. He revealed that the true bloodline of House Bennett possessed a latent power so overwhelming that the High Council feared its awakening, above all else a power capable of commanding any werewolf regardless of their rank or strength. Before Claire could fully process his heavy words, the reinforced mahogany doors of the archive room were suddenly blasted inward with tremendous force, splintering into a shower of wood-sharp debris. Lord Daniel Hayes, the king's power-hungry uncle and head of the High Royal Council, marched arrogantly into the room accompanied by 8 massive elite executioners clad in dark spiked armor with bared gleaming claws. Daniel's harsh face twisted into a grotesque sneer as his glowing red eyes locked onto Claire, accusing her of being an illegitimate parasite and a dark abomination sent to destroy the stability of the kingdom. Daniel roared that the High Council had unanimously ordered the immediate execution of the last Bennett survivor, demanding that Alexander step aside and let the executioners do their duty. Alexander drew his massive steel broadsword in a single fluid motion, his golden alpha energy flaring brightly around his shoulders as he placed his tall, powerful frame directly between Claire and the advancing executioners. He barked a fierce command, asserting his absolute royal authority and declaring that Claire was under his personal protection and that anyone who dared to lay a hand on her would be executed on the spot for high treason. The oppressive atmosphere inside the High Archives reached a terrifying breaking point as Lord Daniel Hayes signaled the 8 elite executioners to strike without mercy. The heavily armored warriors lunged forward like shadowy beasts, their sharp iron boots pounding against the marble floor as they bypassed King Alexander Hayes to swarm toward the defenseless Waitress behind him. Alexander moved with breathtaking speed, his massive steel broadsword swinging in a lethal glowing arc that intercepted 3 executioners at once, sending a blinding shower of golden sparks and metallic screeches ringing through the vast chamber. However, 2 massive enforcers, taking advantage of the chaotic melee, broke past his guard and dived straight toward Claire Bennett with deadly intent, their razor-sharp claws aimed directly at her exposed throat. Fear slammed into Claire's chest with the force of an avalanche as the cold, gleaming steel of their claws closed in on her fair skin. Yet in that split second between life and death, as the icy breath of impending execution touched her face, something ancient, primal, and utterly formidable ignited deep within her royal bloodline. The silver crescent pendant resting against her chest suddenly burst into a blinding celestial radiance that flooded every dark corner of the library with searing white light. Her calm gray-blue eyes transformed instantly into glowing pools of pure incandescent silver as her slender frame stood tall, unyielding, and immensely powerful against the oncoming storm. She opened her mouth and unleashed a single resonant command that was not a desperate Waitress plea for mercy but an undisputed ancient Omega Queen's command that had not echoed through the realm for over a century. Her voice echoed like a sudden thunderclap, carrying an absolute physical force that slammed into the 2 rushing enforcers like a solid stone wall. The overwhelming royal authority embedded in her bloodline instantly shattered their inner wolves' willpower, crushing their fierce instincts in a single fraction of a second. A sickening crack echoed through the room as both massive warriors collapsed violently onto their knees, their heavy iron armor smashing hard against the stone floor as an uncontrollable biological compulsion forced them into a deep, helpless bow right at her feet. Lord Daniel gasped in utter horror, grabbing his own throat as his knees wobbled uncontrollably while his glowing red eyes widened in complete disbelief. Claire took a step forward, her torn linen collar exposing the blazing Crescent artifact as silver light radiated continuously from her pale skin like a living star. She glared at the terrified counselors, her voice ringing out with supreme authority as she declared that no man in this kingdom would ever lay a finger on her again. She turned her glowing silver gaze toward Daniel and the remaining guards crowding the archway, demanding in a voice that shook the very foundations of the castle for the entire pack to kneel before their rightful heir. The ancient magical runes carved into the royal palace stones resonated in harmony with her voice, unleashing a crushing wave of absolute bloodline sovereignty that rippled outward across the hall. The sheer weight of her magic crashed down from above like a falling mountain. Lord Daniel let out a strangled groan as he was slammed down onto his knees, his hands clutching his chest in agony as he suffocated under the immense spiritual pressure. Behind him, every noble elder, armored knight and palace guard who had rushed into the corridor felt their knees buckle violently under the inescapable compulsion of her royal command. One by one the entire high royal pack collapsed onto the floor in complete helpless submission, leaving only King Alexander standing unhindered as Claire deliberately shielded his heart from her crushing power. Absolute silence descended upon the vast ruined archives like a heavy suffocating cloak as dozens of elite warriors, noble elders and high counselors remained pinned helplessly to the cold marble floor under the crushing weight of Claire's glowing silver aura. Lord Daniel Hayes gritted his teeth in sheer humiliation as his body trembled uncontrollably against the stone, his dark alpha ego shattering completely beneath the undeniable supremacy of the ancient Omega command. The power-hungry lord realized in a flash of blind terror that his entire political empire, built on decades of blood purges and deceit, was crumbling into dust within a single second. Yet as Claire Bennett took a slow, deliberate breath, allowing her intense silver radiance to ease slightly to spare the breathless guards, Daniel felt a fleeting moment of physical relief. Driven by pure madness and desperate malice, the defeated uncle secretly slipped his hand toward his inner coat sleeve, retrieving a small concealed glass dagger coated in a deadly black wolfsbane poison capable of instant assassination. With a frantic, crazed roar, Daniel forced himself up from the floor, lunging violently toward Claire's exposed side with the toxic blade glinting under the flickering torchlight. Alexander Hayes, who had been carefully monitoring his uncle, saw the desperate betrayal unfolding in a heartbeat. The 35-year-old Alpha King moved with astounding supernatural speed, his golden alpha energy flaring brightly around his massive frame like a blazing solar aura. His broadsword swept upward in a clean, powerful arc, striking the poisoned glass dagger with precise force. A sharp metallic ring echoed through the air as the deadly weapon shattered into 1,000 harmless fragments, showering the stone floor. Without breaking his fluid momentum, Alexander spun around and planted his heavy armored boot squarely into Daniel's chest, sending the traitorous lord flying backward through the air. Daniel crashed heavily against the thick stone pillar, groaning in agony as he slid down to the floor. Before he could even draw a breath, Alexander closed the distance in a single stride, pressing the icy razor tip of his massive broadsword directly against Daniel's exposed throat. Alexander glared down at his uncle with eyes burning like molten gold, his voice echoing through the vast chamber like thunder as he stripped Daniel of his council position, his titles and his pack status for high treason against the realm. He commanded the trembling royal guards, who were just beginning to rise from Claire's released pressure, to bind the screaming traitor in heavy enchanted iron chains and drag him deep into the darkest subterranean dungeon. As the guards dragged the kicking and screaming lord away, an archivist rushed into the library holding a scorched leather portfolio recovered from Daniel's private quarters. The archivist bowed low before Claire and Alexander, presenting a set of secret documents that revealed a horrifying truth. Daniel had already dispatched a ruthless rogue mercenary squad 3 days prior to the treacherous northern border with explicit orders to execute an elderly couple living under the assumed names of Thomas and Elena Bennett. Claire's fair face went completely pale as her heart clutched in sudden horror, realizing that her beloved parents, who had sacrificed everything to keep her safe, were about to be slaughtered in cold blood. She turned her gray-blue eyes toward Alexander, her quiet composure shattering into desperate urgency. The Alpha King did not hesitate for a single second, grabbing his heavy fur traveling cloak and declaring that the elite cavalry would ride north immediately to save her family from the dark shadows of the past. Knowing that her parents were facing imminent execution at the hands of Daniel's rogue mercenaries, Claire Bennett did not waste a single breath as she sprinted alongside King Alexander Hayes toward the royal stables under the cold gray light of dawn. The 35-year-old Alpha King and the fair-skinned former Waitress mounted 2 powerful black warhorses, leading a swift contingent of 12 elite royal riders out of the castle gates at a breakneck gallop. Their urgent journey toward the treacherous northern border became a relentless 3-day race against time, pushing through blinding snowstorms, howling mountain winds, and treacherous icy mountain passes that threatened to throw their steeds into deep ravines. Claire wrapped her thick wool cloak tightly around her shoulders, her fair face pale from exhaustion, yet her soft gray-blue eyes burned with an unshakable determination that kept her moving forward without a single word of complaint. On the evening of the third day, the small cavalry group finally reached the dense pine forest marking the northern boundary of the realm, where the heavy scent of burning wood and dark smoke hung thick in the freezing twilight air. As they broke through the dense tree-line, a terrifying scene unfolded before their eyes inside a secluded snowy clearing. A brutal squad of a dozen dark-armored rogue mercenaries had surrounded a rustic 2-story wooden cabin, using heavy iron axes and flaming torches to batter down the reinforced oak front door while thick black smoke billowed from the burning roof. Inside the barricaded cabin, an elderly white-skinned man with silver hair held a heavy hunting crossbow with steady hands while his fair-skinned wife frantically piled heavy furniture against the creaking back door, both coughing violently as the flames consumed the upper floor. The towering mercenary captain raised a jagged battle-axe, shouting ruthless orders to break through the timbers, burn the cottage to ash, and leave no survivors on Lord Daniel's explicit command. Alexander drew his massive steel broadsword, leaping from his galloping warhorse before the beast even came to a complete stop and crashing into the mercenary rear line like a golden thunderbolt, slicing through 2 guards in a single swift motion. Claire galloped straight into the chaotic fray as a giant rogue mercenary leaped from the shadows, swinging a broad sword directly toward her face with a vicious sneer. Claire did not flinch or pull back her reins. Instead, she locked her eyes onto the attacker as her gray-blue eyes flared with brilliant, blinding silver light. She unleashed a single, resonant word of royal command that struck the soldier's mind like a massive iron mallet, instantly shattering his inner wolf's resistance and sending him collapsing face first into the freezing snow, completely paralyzed and unconscious. Alexander kicked open the burning front door of the cabin, clearing a wide path through the falling embers and collapsing beams, roaring for Thomas and Elena Bennett to get out immediately. The silver-haired couple stumbled out into the freezing night air, gasping for breath as they fell into the deep snow outside the burning structure. As the thick ash cleared, Elena Bennett raised her tear-filled eyes, catching sight of the fair-skinned young woman in royal furs who was dropping her reins and sprinting toward them. Elena gasped in utter disbelief, her voice cracking as she called out her daughter's name. Claire dropped to her knees in the cold snow, throwing her arms around both of her parents and weeping tears of overwhelming relief as 20 long years of painful exile, fear, and separation vanished in an instant. Thomas wrapped his strong arms tightly around his daughter and wife, holding them close against his chest as his body trembled with profound emotion, thanking the heavens above that their brave little girl had survived the dark years in hiding. Alexander stood guard over the emotional family, his broadsword glowing with golden alpha energy as his royal riders quickly bound the remaining defeated mercenaries in heavy iron chains, securing the northern border completely and ensuring that House Bennett would never be hunted again. 2 weeks after the thrilling rescue in the freezing northern wilderness, the capital city of the kingdom underwent a massive transformation as the deep scars of corruption were finally healed. Inside the grand throne room of the Golden Palace, where the ancient Eastern bell had once sounded its ominous warning, a solemn historical assembly was convened to officially mark the rebirth of the realm. Hundreds of noble elders, high counselors, pack alpha leaders, and armored knights gathered beneath the vaulted stone ceilings, their whispering voices filling the vast hall with palpable anticipation. Every single corrupt official associated with Lord Daniel's dark conspiracy had been stripped of their titles, tried for high treason, and sentenced to lifelong imprisonment in the subterranean dungeons, ensuring that the shadows of the past could no longer threaten the populace. The Grand Chancellor of the kingdom stepped forward onto the elevated marble dais, holding a magnificent gold leaf charter emblazoned with the restored crest of House Bennett. Clad in an exquisite midnight blue gown embroidered with intricate silver thread, Claire Bennett stood beside King Alexander Hayes, looking out over the silent crowd with absolute grace and calm composure. The silver crescent pendant rested openly against her chest, no longer hidden beneath a servant's linen collar, catching the brilliant sunlight streaming through the stained glass windows. The Grand Chancellor bowed low before her, declaring in a booming voice that by right of royal blood, by the undisputed strength of her Omega command, and by the unanimous consent of the Council, the kingdom formally offered Lady Claire Bennett the supreme title of High Regent, granting her total authority over the royal pack. A breathless hush fell across the entire throne room as every noble waited for her response, fully expecting the long-lost heir to claim the crown that had been stolen from her family 25 years ago. Claire looked down at the crowd of influential leaders, then turned her soft gray-blue eyes toward Alexander, who offered her a warm, supportive nod, completely ready to step aside if she desired the throne. Claire took a steady step forward, her voice ringing out through the vast hall with crystal clarity, echoing off the stone walls without needing the force of magic to command respect. She announced to the astonished court that she officially declined the title of High Regent, choosing instead to reject the absolute power that had corrupted so many before her. A wave of surprised murmurs rippled through the noble ranks as Claire explained that she had not broken her silence or revealed her royal identity to rule over others, but rather to ensure that no citizen in the realm would ever again be hunted, persecuted, or forced to hide their true bloodline in fear. She declared that she would accept the newly created role of independent advisor of pack rights, acting as a protector for the vulnerable and a check against tyranny, while the power to govern would remain with a fair king and a transparent, accountable council. Alexander stepped down from his royal throne, his heart swelling with profound admiration for her selfless wisdom. The 35-year-old Alpha King bowed his head deeply to her in public reverence, and seeing their sovereign honor her decision, every single noble, knight, and elder in the hall dropped to their knees, bowing not out of magical compulsion or fear, but out of genuine respect and devotion to the woman who had saved their kingdom from darkness. In the quiet months following the grand reformation of the kingdom, the Grand Golden Palace settled into a peaceful, harmonious rhythm that it had not experienced in over a century. The heavy tension that once lingered in the stone corridors was replaced by a light, hopeful atmosphere, as citizens and staff moved freely without fear of dark conspiracies or sudden purges. Late one peaceful afternoon, as the setting sun bathed the manicured courtyards in a rich amber glow, Claire Bennet walked quietly down the spiral stone staircase leading into the subterranean palace kitchens. She wore a simple white linen apron wrapped over her elegant blue dress, her light brown hair neatly styled in a side braid that rested over her shoulder. The head chef, busy overseeing the evening feast, turned around and dropped his heavy wooden spoon in complete shock, stammering frantically that a royal lady of her esteemed status should never be present in the servant quarters. Claire let out a soft, melodic laugh, stepping forward to pick up a silver serving tray holding 2 steaming porcelain cups of freshly brewed dark coffee. She reassured the nervous cooking staff that spending an entire year working as a humble waitress had taught her the true value of honest labor, and no noble title or royal bloodline would ever cause her to forget who she truly was. Carrying the tray with practiced ease, she ascended the winding staircase toward the royal quarters, navigating the familiar passageways until she reached the heavy mahogany doors of King Alexander Hayes's private study. Without knocking, she pushed the door open with her elbow, stepping into the quiet, warm room just as she used to do every morning. The 35-year-old Alpha King sat behind his massive oak desk, surrounded by tall stacks of state reports, land charters, and reform documents. Alexander looked up from his paperwork, a genuine, warm smile breaking across his handsome face as he watched the fair-skinned woman set the porcelain cup right beside his right hand on the polished desk. He leaned back in his leather chair, his piercing amber eyes filled with affection as he teased her gently, stating that the official independent advisor of pack rights was certainly not required by royal decree to personally deliver coffee to her sovereign. Claire leaned casually against the edge of the heavy desk, crossing her arms with a subtle, playful smirk on her face, replying that she only brought it because his royal attendants still had not learned how to brew it correctly without burning the roasted beans. Alexander let out a low, heartfelt laugh, setting his golden quill down as he stood up from his chair and walked around the desk to stand directly in front of her. The tall Alpha King looked down into her calm gray-blue eyes, his expression turning deeply serious as he reached out to gently take her slender hand in his own. He spoke in a soft, low voice that vibrated with intense emotion, expressing his everlasting gratitude for her extraordinary courage on the fateful morning the Eastern bell had rung across the valley. He confessed that when he first saw her serving coffee in the Grand Hall, he was captivated not by her hidden royal lineage or her latent magical power, but by the quiet strength, grace, and unwavering integrity that radiated from her spirit. Alexander tightened his grip on her hand softly, asking her to remain by his side forever, not because of ancient pack laws, royal obligations, or political alliances, but because his heart belonged entirely to her. Claire looked up into his warm amber eyes, feeling a deep, profound sense of peace wash over her soul, knowing that her long, painful journey through the shadows had finally brought her to her true home. She smiled softly, resting her hand against his chest where his heart beat strong and steady, promising that she would walk beside him as his equal and his partner for all the days of their lives. 6 months after the quiet evening in the study, the high lantern upon the eastern tower burned with a constant golden brilliance, casting a serene radiance across the manicured gardens of the royal palace. The ancient eastern bell remained peacefully suspended within its massive stone archway, completely silent now, no longer needed to sound desperate alarms or summon lost heirs because the absolute truth had already set the entire realm free. Claire Bennet stood alone on the high stone balcony overlooking the sprawling capital city below, watching the endless sea of warm, glittering lights that dotted the evening landscape. The cold mountain breeze ruffled her light brown hair, which fell gracefully over her shoulders, while her silver crescent pendant caught the brilliant white rays of the full moon, shining openly against her dark velvet gown without any need for concealment. Her heart was filled with a profound, unshakable sense of peace as she reflected upon how drastically her world had changed. Her beloved parents, Thomas and Elena Bennet, were now living comfortably inside the fully restored Bennet estate on the outskirts of the city, surrounded by loyal friends and protected by the law, their 20 long years of painful exile finally brought to an end. Furthermore, under her direct guidance as the independent advisor, the royal archives had been opened to all citizens, old bloodline prejudices were dismantled, and the High Council operated with complete transparency, ensuring that no family would ever suffer the horror of a quiet political purge again. The quiet rustle of heavy footsteps sounded against the marble floor behind her as King Alexander Hayes stepped out onto the breezy balcony. The 35-year-old Alpha King walked up behind her with effortless grace, gently placing a heavy, plush fur cloak around her slender shoulders to shield her fair skin from the night chill. He wrapped his strong arms around her waist, pulling her back gently against his broad chest as they both looked out over the peaceful kingdom they had saved together. Alexander rested his chin softly against her head, breathing in the sweet scent of her hair, asking her in a low, tender voice what thoughts occupied her mind on such a quiet night. Claire leaned back against his solid frame, placing her hands over his, replying with a soft smile that she was remembering her very first day working as a simple waitress inside his grand dining hall. She confessed that on that morning, her heart was filled with constant fear, and her only goal in life was to remain completely invisible, hoping to fade into the background so that no one would ever discover her true identity. Alexander let out a low, warm chuckle, kissing the top of her head as he whispered that she had never truly been invisible to him. He admitted that long before the ancient bell had chimed and long before her royal Omega power was revealed to the world, her quiet dignity, her composure, and her sharp, observant eyes had drawn his attention every single day. He told her that among all the noisy, power-hungry court nobles who frequented his hall, she was the only person who possessed a genuine, calm spirit that brought peace to his chaotic world. Claire turned around within his embrace, looking up into his warm amber eyes that burned with absolute devotion and everlasting love. She reached up, gently tracing the line of his jawline, expressing her eternal gratitude for his unwavering trust on the day she revealed her secret, knowing that without his protection and courage, her story might have ended in tragedy inside the archive room. Alexander smiled deeply, taking her hand and pressing a lingering kiss upon her knuckles, promising her that as long as the stars shone above the mountains, he would stand as her guardian, her equal, and her partner. Standing together on the high balcony as the midnight hour arrived, the Alpha King and his Omega Queen looked out over the quiet, thriving realm beneath them, completely united in purpose and heart, ready to lead their people into a bright, endless future together. The quiet midnight air settled deeply across the ancient capital as a gentle mountain breeze blew through the towering balcony arches, carrying the faint, sweet fragrance of night-blooming jasmine directly into the royal quarters. King Alexander Hayes held Claire Bennet close within his strong embrace, feeling the steady, rhythmic beat of her heart pressing against his chest while the silver starlight illuminated her gentle, white-skinned features. The long, agonizing years of hiding in fear, enduring painful secrecy, and walking through the suffocating shadows of dark political conspiracies had finally vanished into the night, replaced by an unshakable bond forged through shared trial, fierce protection, and mutual respect. Down below in the winding stone streets of the city, citizens walked freely and peacefully under the warm glow of the lantern light without the constant fear of unjust purges, secret executions, or corrupt High Council decrees, fully aware that a wise, compassionate, and just leadership now protected their basic rights. Claire turned slightly within the Alpha King's warm embrace, looking up into Alexander's fierce amber eyes as a soft, playful smile touched her lips. She remarked in a low, melodious voice that despite all the grand royal titles, the formal ceremonies, and the ancient bloodline prophecies that had reshaped their lives, she would forever cherish those quiet early mornings in the palace dining hall where their story first began over a simple porcelain cup of coffee. Alexander chuckled softly, a deep, resonant sound that vibrated through his chest, as he leaned down to press a tender, lingering kiss upon her smooth forehead. He promised her in a quiet, solemn whisper that no matter how many decades passed, no matter how vast their kingdom grew, he would always listen for her voice above all others in the realm, honoring the remarkable woman who had taught him the true meaning of strength and humility. As the clock struck the midnight hour, the deep indigo sky above the eastern tower was suddenly painted with a breathtaking display of luminous shooting stars, their radiant silver trail streaking across the heavens like a cosmic blessing over the land. The brilliant display marked the official dawn of a prosperous, harmonious new era for the entire royal pack, a time where the traditional divisions between ranks were softened by justice and understanding. Hand in hand, the fair-skinned Alpha King and his radiant Omega Queen turned away from the vast horizon and stepped back into the warmth of their home, leaving the silent Eastern Belle behind as an immortal symbol of truth, resilience, and everlasting love that would guide, protect, and inspire their realm for generations to come.